What is going on, guys? Wes here with Airsoft. Today we're going to be installing an Inferno Gen 2 into a G&G Body. If you guys are here just for installing the engine itself, skip ahead to the timestamp in the description below. Otherwise, let's get started with this install. I'm going to go ahead and pop out the front body pin with your punch, or you can use a screwdriver or anything along those lines. Go ahead and pull the upper receiver off. Sometimes you need to depress the fake bolt catch and set this aside. You're not going to need it. The next thing, I'm going to go ahead, pop off the little button down here and flip this to the side. There's plenty of wires, and I forgot a razor blade. All right, so the reason I needed a razor blade was back here. You can see there's a zip tie right here. Give it a good old cut. So if you just press, it'll cut the zip tie. And the other reason being, this has a cover protecting the data cable that goes in. And the only way to get to the quick disconnect is to cut through the plastic protecting it, like so. Peel it off to the side and give it a little yank. Cool. All right, so that's the end of the razor blade. So just jump in, take off your buffer tube with the buffer tube screw. Find your buffer tube screw with your Phillips head screwdriver and just take it apart. If you just dump it, your buffer tube screw will come out. And go ahead and pull it about that far, and you're going to expose the 2 power wires that G&G provides, and you're just going to rip those apart. Obviously, since you're installing something, you still want to be gentle because you don't want to like ruin anything. But so now that you've disconnected your stock and buffer tube, that can be set to the side. Next, sling plate is going to just slide right off. Can also be set to the side. Now down here, you're going to need a 2mm Allen key, and it removes the motor grip plate. All right, and that can also be set to the side. And I like to keep these screws in their holes on the grip plate. Just set it down like this. That way, you don't lose them. So right here, you're going to have your motor. Sometimes these are a little difficult to get out, so go ahead and just get yourself Phillips head, not Phillips head, your Allen key or something, and pry these off. Tend to be a little gentle with these because you don't want to bend them, but once again, they can be bent they can be bent right back, and once again, we are not using any of these parts again. So here's your motor. That can also be set to the side. So down at the bottom of the grip, there's going to be 2 more Phillips head screws. You're going to go ahead and use the same screwdriver that you used to take off your buffer tube to go in there. Sometimes they stick to the end of the screwdriver. Sometimes they stay right in the grip. If they stay in the grip, I leave them in the grip because it makes reassembly a whole lot easier when they're still in the grip. So this one stayed in. So you're just going to work this one off. And you can see, well, it's hard to see, but the screws are still in their holes. You can just set that right here. You're going to be reusing it. Set on the side, the screws should stay in place. All right. So depending on what G&G you have, this might be a very small Phillips head, or in my case, it is a 1.5mm Allen key that you're going to go ahead and grab and just take apart. So once again, I like to leave the screw in the mag release. Take your spring and the other side of the mag release, and I like to just keep them together. That way you don't get confused when reassembling. So over here, going to have your rear body pin. I'm going to go ahead and take your punch again and your little hammer. And it's easy if you prop it up on something because this pin needs to come out, and if it's laying flat on the table, there's nowhere for it to go. So put it on your screwdriver or something along those lines and pull out your rear body pin. The last piece you're going to need to remove is the floor pin, which is very important. It helps align the gearbox and everything like that. So If you look closely, you can see that there is a grooved side and a smooth side. The grooved side is actually thicker in diameter, which keeps the pin in place. So you don't want to push the thicker portion through the whole gearbox. You want it to come out. So if you see the grooved side of the floor pin, flip it over and also set it on the side like that again. Take your punch. And G&Gs normally don't require much force. It's maybe 1 or 2. And as you can see, that was the right side. So when taking the gearbox out, the easiest thing is to flip the selector into a 45-degree in between safety and semi and just lift outward. And there you go. Now set the body off to the side. All right, so here's one of the more intimidating things because this is something you don't want to mess up, at least when you first do it. You eventually begin to not worry about it because it's an airsoft gun and you will be okay. So you're just going to start removing the screws. There's no particular order, but just make sure to keep them organized and don't let them run away from you because they're quite important. So we're just going to take all the screws out. Alright, so when you come down to the last screw or so, just kind of be careful because the gearbox is under tension and you don't have any screws holding it together. The weird thing about G&Gs is normally the screws come out on the side you take off. G&Gs are opposite, so you're going to go ahead and make sure you hold this together, flip it around, set it down, continue to hold pressure onto the gearbox shell. Take either your punch or your Allen key or whatever and put it into the spring guide right in the back of the gearbox and press down. Press down and pull up on this side of the gearbox. So now that you have the gearbox apart, the only components you're going to need from the gearbox is your spring guide and your trigger and trigger spring and your screw, but we'll get there. So when disassembling, the best thing you can do is grab a bag of some sort and go ahead and put the screw or the spring, all the compression components, the gears, the anti-reversal latch into the bag. Now you're going to take a very small Phillips head screwdriver and remove your cutoff lever. You're not gonna reuse any of this. And then there's a little spring on the selector plate that also does not need to be reused. Then you're gonna take off the screw holding in this gun's case, the ETU, which is G&G's kind of like is kind of like their MOSFET system. If you've ever heard of BTCs or anything like that, they kind of work in that way. Go ahead and rip the wires out, and I just fold them up and put them in the bag. So the only thing we kept from that is the screw holding in the ETU. It's very, very small, but it's very, very useful because it holds in the Inferno electronics. So clean up any wiring that's still glued to the gearbox shell. I don't know why G&G does that, but they do. So one other thing that a lot of people don't do, and I've never really seen people mention, is taking off your selector plate. And the reason I took this off is because the backside is very flat where it engages the button on the Inferno. Sometimes it'll snag the button and actually break it. I've had that happen numerous times on Polar Star Jacks and some Infernos, and it's only with G&Gs. I don't know why. I don't know if this is just a lot thicker than the unit is designed for, but I just have it happen all the time. So preventative maintenance, I just take off the selector plate, go over to my belt sander, or if you don't have a belt sander, a piece of sandpaper, and I pretty much just sand a kind of like a 45-degree angle, making a ramp for where it engages. It makes it a lot easier when it comes to selecting which modes, because instead of it hitting the button, it will ride over the button. It works really well, and I haven't had any buttons break when I do this. Alright, so after you go ahead and shave the angle onto your selector plate, just reinstall it. and just ensure that it functions properly. Alright, so now you can set the gearbox aside. We need to open up the Inferno. Just clear this off. A clean workstation is a better one because you're organized. So crack open your Inferno and take everything out of the packaging. There's your Inferno. There's this piece that they include, extra O-rings that you don't need right now, and the rest of the components. Alright, so you're going to go ahead and take your hose that is included in your kit and thread it into the back of the Inferno. There's only one place it can go, so you can't really mess that up. So now that your macro line is tightened to your unit, next thing you're going to do is take your wire, the black wire with the white connector, and it plugs into the back of the solenoid. And once that is plugged in, I also suggest you test that. So if you did get a battery in your player kit, go ahead and crack it open. I do suggest that you charge it first, but they do come, I believe, half charged or a quarter of the way charged. So it'll give you a response if it functions. Cool, so it does work, which is good. So now it's ready to go into your gun. Go ahead and grab your gearbox shell and insert the unit where the cylinder was. It's very simple. I like to run the data wire under the macro line because, in my opinion, it makes for everything to fit a little more snug. The trigger board also drops into place very, very easy. It doesn't really go anywhere else. After it is in place, go ahead and grab that screw that you removed from your ETU unit and your little screwdriver and put the screw right back where it was. And make it snug just so the board doesn't move, but it doesn't need to be like ridiculously tight. So I was mistaken. This guy you can reuse on jacks and other units. It's too long for the Inferno. The reason I like to use this is because it stays a little more secure in place when you try to install everything. These are a little flimsy, and I mean, they work. To make life a little easier, go ahead and grab your screw that holds your buffer tube and everything in place and confirm that it threads into this adapter piece. And I also just like to leave it in there because what that does is allow you to close the gearbox shell and confirm that this is still in place. These oftentimes fall over. So you're going to go ahead and take your trigger and your trigger spring. Now this can be a very tricky part because this is something that you learn and it comes in time to get it right the first time. But play around with it and you will get it installed. So now you're going to take your data wires, which are your battery wires, and run those out the main hole at the bottom of the gearbox shell. Flip your unit, make sure it's sitting properly inside the gearbox shell. Take your wires and hose and run it out the main hole. I'm going to go ahead and make sure everything lines up and press down. So the one thing you want to confirm is that the gearbox is flush all the way around, and when you push and pull on your screw back here, you want to confirm that it doesn't allow that piece to move around. So I still leave it in there all the way up until the point of installing it into the gearbox. Apply pressure as you flip the gearbox shell over and continue to apply pressure just to make sure everything stays in place. And at this point, you're going to go ahead and reinstall all of your screws. So as you go ahead and screw the rest of the screws into the gearbox, make sure they're tight, but you don't need to crank them super hard, just enough to be snug. Because there's not going to be any stress on this gearbox shell anymore, considering you have just installed an HPA unit. Check your selector plate, make sure that it slides up and slides left and right perfectly fine, because the last thing you need is for it not to work. So for nozzle alignment, I like to add at least one piece of Gorilla Tape to the bottom of the gearbox shell. The reason I do so is because these guns need very particular nozzle alignment, and if you don't have good nozzle alignment, the gun will not shoot good. Go ahead, cut yourself off a piece of Gorilla Tape with razor blade and apply it right in front of the trigger. This piece is way too large, but that's why we're going to trim it. There we go. So what that's going to do is raise the nozzle alignment upward. It is a little better to be higher than lower. The gun can accommodate that a lot easier. Now we can start reassembly. Just take that screw out. Grab your lower receiver. Run the hose and your wire down through the main compartment. And the gearbox honestly will fall right back into place. Now reassembly, you're going to take your floor pin, make sure safety works, I just like to do that, and work it into the opening like so. Push it as far as it'll go. Take your little hammer, and hit it into place. Next thing, take your rear body pin, give that a nice tap or two. Confirm safety works, confirm it goes into another selector mode, and there you go. Next thing, go ahead and reinstall your grip. Now with this addition, it's going to be a little different than a normal reinstallation. You're going to want to go ahead and put the wire through first, like so. Then, with the battery connector down the grip, insert the hose like so. Now this can be a little difficult because the space is a little limited, but it's okay. So when installing, something I can't stress enough is confirm that you have pulled this downward as you push the grip on. A lot of people press the grip on without pulling on this, and what will happen is the wire will get pinched in between the grip and the gearbox shell. So when you go ahead and tighten those screws, you're going to pinch those wires together and it'll short it out. Now, I've had that happen to me, and I've had a customer call and ask about it, and it's very common. You can actually salvage the unit. It won't actually damage it, but you just want to retape it and make sure it's installed correctly. So now, go ahead and tighten these screws up at the bottom of the grip, the screws that we left in there or reinstalled. A magnetic screwdriver will make that a lot easier if you have one. Now, go ahead and take your sling plate, and since you have no wires back here, it actually makes this part a little easier. Grab your sling plate, grab your stock and a buffer tube, take your screw and your screwdriver. So, crazy enough, all you have to do is just kind of drop it into place. And I like to just shake it around and it goes right in. I don't know why, but they always go right into place. So look down into your buffer tube with your screwdriver, grab hold of your buffer tube screw, and tighten it. Alright, so now go ahead and take your mag release, push the bar side in, flip it over while still applying pressure to the other side, drop your screw down onto the bar that's pushing through. Set the actual button down onto the spring. The easiest thing to do for me is push the button over the bar coming through and hold pressure with your thumb like so. So I'm holding the back of the mag release and pushing down on it. That way there's no tension on the screw, and that way you can just grab your 1.5 millimeter and it will go in with no tension. And this just needs to go as tight as it will go. Just right as it stops is tight enough, and confirm that it moves properly. So now, since we have the lower receiver completely assembled, I'm going to go ahead and grab your battery again. Confirm that your safety works. Confirm semi works. And confirm full auto works. So disconnect your battery. You're going to go ahead and take your base plate here. Now you can take out the motor height adjustment screw right there, and you're going to need to remove that because your macro line needs to come through. So go ahead and remove that. Sometimes a vise will help this screw come out. It needs quite a bit of tension. You'd be surprised. But if you firmly grasp it in your hand, you better insert that SpongeBob quote scene in this video, or I'm going to be disappointed, Jesse.
Firmly grasp it in your hand.
And remove this screw completely. And you're not going to need that anymore. At this point, you're going to flip the gun, connect your battery here if you're going to play, but if you're not, put that down into your grip, run the macro line through the base plate, and since you left those screws in there, you're going to go ahead and pick up your 2mm Allen key, screw these down till they're snug. They don't need to be super tight because if you ever need to access your battery, you don't want to have them on there with all the strength. So now go ahead, you can either take a screwdriver or whatnot. Pop your front pin out, take your upper receiver, press back on the fake bolt catch, set the gun down on the table or whatnot, and that way you can hold them together because there is a spring on the hop-up. Now press your front pin together, and now you have a fully functioning Inferno Gen 2 Spartan Edition in your G&G. Thank you guys for watching, and if you ever have any other questions about tech installs or anything along those lines, feel free to bother our customer service guy, Andrew, and shoot us an email or give us a call. Thanks so much, guys.